Welcome back to Reclaim the Room. I'm Howard, and this is episode 4 of the Out of the Flame series. In episode 3, I told you about the summer, the question that wouldn't leave me alone, the two griefs I was carrying, and what my body was doing while my mind was still trying to catch up. I told you that my truth this summer was that no part of me wanted to go back. And I told you that I was going to have to decide what to do with that. This episode is just what I did with it. The first few weeks of summer break didn't feel like a break at all. My body didn't register the rest. My mind didn't know how to exhale. I was still stuck in the hallways of March 10th, pacing mentally, silently panicking, waiting for the next emergency that wasn't coming, but that my nervous system was convinced was still on its way. While other people were planning vacations, I was replaying trauma. While some of my colleagues were thinking about next year's classroom, I was just trying to sleep through the night. And somewhere in that, in the middle of the summer, that didn't feel like a summer, I knew. Not as a question anymore, but as a fact. I was not going back. After many conversations with my family and even more conversations with God, I finally gave myself permission to do what the district would never have done for me. I resigned. I want to be precise about what I resigned from because I think it matters. I didn't resign from students. I want to say that clearly because in every conversation I've had about leaving teaching, there's always someone, meaning well, perhaps not, that implies that leaving the classroom is a form of abandoning kids. And I need to push back on that firmly and directly. I never stopped loving the kids, not for a single day. The students were the only part of the building that I was not trying to get away from. What I resigned from was a system that weaponizes your loyalty and punishes your clarity. A system that expected me to absorb a traumatic event, return to the building where it happened, perform functional normalcy in front of 30 children per period, and do all of that without once asking me whether I was okay, without once acknowledging that the people inside the building had experienced something that deserved more than a directive to get ready. I resigned from that, and I'm not apologizing for it. But I also want to tell you something that I think is important because it's the part of the story that I am least proud of in terms of how it looks. Even though I understand exactly why it happened, I missed the official resignation deadline. And I want to explain that because it was not negligence, nor was it carelessness. It was the last act of someone who was still trying to make it work. I'd submitted a transfer request. I was still hoping in the way that you hope for something when evidence has long since stopped supporting hope, that the system might offer me a safer path forward. I waited in good faith for a response that never came. And while I was waiting, the resignation window quietly closed. I was still trying to make it work, still holding out for a system that never truly saw me. When I finally understood what had happened, that the window was closed, that the transfer wasn't coming, that there was no path forward that didn't require me to walk back into that building and pretend, I sat down and I wrote the letter. Now I'll read to you the letter I submitted. It's not a performance, it's not a plea. It's the truth written plainly. To whom it may concern, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as a middle school science teacher, effective as soon as permitted under district policy. I acknowledge that I've missed the official resignation deadline, but that's not due to negligence. I submitted a transfer request in hope of continuing to serve students in a safer, more stable environment. I waited in good faith for a response, and during that waiting period, the resignation window quietly closed. I accept the consequences of that decision, but I will not allow my departure to be reduced to missed paperwork because the real reasons I'm leaving are deeper, harder, and long overdue. Th- This spring, a student was murdered on our campus during the school day, inside the building while we were doing our jobs. I was there. I was on lockdown. I did what I was trained to do, protected my students, stayed calm, and followed every protocol. And once the building reopened, we were told to get ready for the students. Never once did they say, "How are you?" Not, "Do you need time?" Not, "What support do you need to keep showing up after witnessing something irreversible?" Just get ready. Over and over again, we were told to get ready. That moment made the truth undeniable. The system never intended to protect me. It only expected me to keep going. But this resignation didn't begin with that tragedy. I've been carrying this decision for years. I gave everything to this district: my time, my ideas, my leadership, my loyalty. I took on responsibilities beyond my job description. I mentored, I supported, I created, I led. But I was not recognized, and I definitely wasn't advanced, and I was not protected. I was blackballed, not because I was unqualified, but because I refused to stay silent. I named what others wouldn't. I pushed for what students and staff actually needed. I didn't flatter the right people or play the political game. I didn't perform compliance for appearances. I did the real work. And in return, I was kept out of rooms I earned access to. Nepotism and favoritism are not whispered rumors in this district. They are the rule. Positions are filled through relationships, not readiness. Doors are open for those who follow the script. And when you don't, you find yourself shut out, no matter how much you contribute. So, yes, I missed the resignation deadline because I was still trying to make it work, still hoping the transfer would be honored, still holding out for a system that never truly saw me. But I'm done asking for permission to protect my peace. If the cost of leaving is a suspension of my well earned certification, I'll take it. But I won't stay in a place that demands silence in exchange for survival. I'm choosing myself, my health, my future. I leave with clarity and without regret. Sincerely, Andrea Howard. That's it. That's the letter that ended my career. I've read that letter many times since I submitted it, and every time the thing that stops me is not the hardest part, the blackballing, the nepotism, the missed deadline. It's the simplest part. Get ready. Just get ready. Because in those two words is everything the institution was and everything I refused to be. There was no acknowledgement of what we had just lived through. There's no recognition that the people in that building were carrying something that no professional directive could reach. There's only the expectation, unspoken but absolute, that we would absorb it and continue and perform the function we were hired to perform, because that is what the system required, and the system's requirements were not negotiable. This is what I was resigning from. Not a bad day, not a difficult year, a system that had made clear in the most irreversible possible way that it never intended to protect the people inside it. And I want to name something else that's in that letter, something I think is important for anyone who's sitting with a similar decision. I was blackballed. I named it in the letter and I'm naming it here clearly because I think too many educators carry that experience in silence, as though it were a reflection of their worth rather than a reflection of the institution's dysfunction. I was qualified. I had nearly 2 decades of experience. I didn't get those positions I applied for because I refused to perform the compliance that the culture required. That's a cost I paid for being honest in a system that doesn't reward honesty. I'm naming it so that anyone else who has paid that cost knows they're not imagining it. The letter also named something that I'm not ashamed of, even though it could have had serious professional consequences. I missed the resignation deadline, and I submitted anyway. And I said that in the letter that if the cause for leaving was a suspension of my certification, I would take it. I meant that because the alternative, staying in a space that demanded silence in exchange for survival, was a cost I was no longer willing to pay. I'm done asking for permission to protect my peace. I want to be honest about what it felt like to submit that letter because I think there's a version of this story, a cleaner, more packaged version, where the resignation is a liberation, immediate and uncomplicated, and the person who sends it feels free the moment it leaves their hands. That's not what it felt like. What it felt like was grief and relief in the same breath. The grief for the career I'd built and the version of myself who'd built it. The grief for the students who I would not be in the room for next year. The grief for the love of the work that this system has slowly, systematically dismantled, not with one dramatic moment, but with years of being overlooked, kept out, and finally exposed to something that no one should have to absorb without support. And underneath all of that grief, not instead of it, but underneath it, clarity. The particular quiet, bone deep clarity of a decision that is right even when it's hard. The clarity of knowing that you finally stopped asking a system that was never going to say yes to give you permission to take care of yourself. I chose myself, my health, my future. And I want to say to anyone who's sitting with a similar decision, anyone who's still trying to make it work, still holding out for the transfer, still waiting for the system to see them, that choosing yourself is not abandoning anyone. It's not weakness. It's not failure. It's the most honest thing I've ever done in my professional life. If any part of that letter echoes something you've been carrying, something you've held in silence because you didn't know how to say it, or were afraid of what it would cost, or have not yet given yourself permission to name, I want you to know you're not alone. You do not owe anyone your silence. You don't owe the system your health in exchange for the appearance of loyalty. Episode 5 is where I tell you what came after the letter, what the aftermath looked like, what it required, and where I am now. I'll see you there. Before I go, I want to leave you with the same invitation I put at the end of this piece when I first wrote it. If any of this echoes something you felt, something you've held in silence, type one word in the comments. Tired, overlooked, done, grieving, free, or whatever your word is. You don't owe context. You're not alone. I'm Howard, and this is Reclaim the Room. I'm out of the flames, but most importantly, I'm still here.